Sustainable change doesn't require effort. It requires better design. In this episode, we look at the cost of willpower-based change. Stay tuned. So what do I mean by willpower-based change? We've all heard about this. We've gone into the New Year's saying we're going to lose weight or go to the gym more often, and we were going to use willpower to avoid eating that ice cream at night or those chips at night. Or, I mean, for me, it's at night. I don't know about you, but the problematic eating or the problematic drinking or the problematic laziness or the problematic things. So we're gonna do better. We're gonna do willpower, and that's fine for a brief time. But effort looks like progress, but pushing harder looks like commitment and discipline, but it is not really. It's culturally praised. People go like, yeah, this guy's working hard. But many high functioning people are quietly exhausted. This episode questions a deeply held assumption that more effort is always better. I don't think it is. I think just because something works in the short term doesn't mean it really works. Now, a little bit of background. I think some of you know this, most of you maybe, I don't know, but it's true that I started learning NLP back in the 1980s, 85 to be precise, from Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins, you probably know, has done a lot of firewalks. And a lot of people, maybe you have done a firewalk or two or many. Those are great for, getting to a peak state and taking massive action for a very short period of time. A firewalk is usually about 15 feet long, right? So you get into peak state and do this thing. Yes, 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 it's done. It's over. So good. I think most people can sustain that kind of peak state for 15 seconds or 5 in this case. But, success usually takes a little longer than that. It does. And sometimes, when you're not a Tony Robbins firewalk and there's not hundreds of thousands of other people around you, all in the same sort of state, it's a little harder to bring that up, even for 5 seconds, even for 15 seconds. So I think you really kind of need better design so that when you're in the flow of things, when you're just doing things, it doesn't require willpower. It doesn't require that extra effort, right? Willpower is a finite cognitive resource. It requires suppression, right? It requires override, it requires self-monitoring. It's useful, but it's not meant to run your life. It's a tool, not a strategy, right? Intelligence and competence make pushing easier at first. High performers are rewarded for overriding discomfort, right? And they suppress their feelings about stuff and they say, I just need to try harder. And sometimes that works for a short time, depending on the person, sometimes works for a long time, but eventually I believe the system rebels. My friend Dan Millman says that there are 3 parts of a person. There's the basic self, the conscious self, and the higher self. And I think what he says is that most people are living their conscious self thinking that they should be in their higher self more often. The higher self is the good part. Conscious self, okay, I'm going to do self-improvement. I'm going to improve myself. And all of that requires you just shut down that basic self stuff. The part that wants to eat that ice cream, the part that wants to, sit down and rest and, that sort of stuff. It suppresses that. But what he says is that these are all parts of us. They don't just go away just because we don't want them there. Carl Jung talked about the shadow, right? And I think other people have referred to it differently, but nevertheless, that part of ourselves, we just don't think is the best part of ourselves. So we try to not do it. But what Dan says is that part of you is like a 7-year-old child, right? It doesn't understand delayed gratification, right? So if you have a choice between, dessert, main course, it's like, well, let's have the dessert first, In fact, let's have the icing off the top of the cake and then maybe the cake before we just go out and play some more, And you say, no, you must eat your vegetables, and what eventually happens is the kid can be suppressed long enough, but eventually they just throw a tantrum. And our bodies are doing that too. Our bodies kind of revolt, and sometimes we just like have a whole carton of ice cream after fasting for a couple of days. Not that I've ever done that, but I've read about people that have done that sort of thing. But it's true for everybody. You can rely on willpower for a while, but eventually you get chronic fatigue, maybe inconsistent follow through, sometimes a lot of self criticism, burnout disguised as laziness. You beat yourself up for it. There's loss of joy and creativity. Like we talked about in the last podcast, increased nervous system threat. So the cost isn't just energy, it's trust. It's trust. So we need to find a way to change that. We need to find a design that reduces friction, removes unnecessary decisions, support consistency without effort. Last week I talked about, I think it was last week, might have been the week before, recently. I'm pretty sure you can look back if you'll know if you watch the past episodes if I said this or not, because they're pretty short episodes. That when I was first in New York City, I was here play in rock and roll bands and be a professional musician as much as I could. And I was a night owl. I would sometimes like leave the house to go out at 11 p.m. and then be out like all night. Sometimes I'd be playing gigs. Sometimes I'd be listening to other bands or whatever. Get home at 5, get home at 6. There were times we played gigs that our second set was at 6 a.m. That didn't happen very often, but it did happen. And our second set started at 6 a.m. It was like this band marathon with four or five bands playing. And so our first set was at midnight, our second set was at 6. And so I was coming home, getting my, keyboard equipment into a taxi at 8 a.m. And I was thinking, who are all these people all dressed up and carrying briefcases? Where are they going? Of course, they're going to work as normal people. But when I sort of transitioned from that night owl work into being, a more normal person, it was a challenge to shift to being more of a morning person. I can't say I'm a morning person. I do get up pretty regularly at 6 o'clock. I don't know if that's early for you. It's early for me. But, I get up and do things because I've kind of reprogrammed myself. But for a while, that transition was tough. And when I was trying to run marathons, because I was in that period of time and throughout the 90s and I guess probably till about 2007 or so, I ran a lot of marathons. 2004, I guess, is when I stopped because I ran Boston in 2024. Okay. Anyway, in the early days of that, I was not a morning person, right? And it was really good for me to run in the morning, but I was not a morning person. So what I would do, I wanted to remove the conflict between what I called my nighttime guy and my morning guy. Obviously both me, but nighttime guy thought it was, hey, let's have another beer. This is a really good idea. We can stay up later. Oh, let's watch this show. Nighttime guy had that idea. Morning guy was going like, I hate nighttime guy. I am so tired. I need to get to bed earlier from now on. So they had this conflict going on. So what I would do is nighttime guy finally got the message, and he would lay out all of the running gear in order, right? So I would put the running shoes on the bottom of the pile, and then the socks on top of that, and the shorts on top of that, and the t-shirt on top of that, or whatever order it was that I figured out to get dressed in. So when I got up in the morning, I'd stumble into the bathroom, I'd have a cup of coffee, and then I'd go, okay, let's put this on and put this on. And it's just like I didn't have to think. It was a system. I'd invented a system where thinking was not necessary. It didn't require willpower, it required just doing, right? And I thought to myself, it's kind of like a fireman at a fire hall. When the alarm goes off, he doesn't think, hey, where's my hat? Oh, anybody see my hat? It's just like boom, 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 down the pole on the truck, 30 seconds, you're riding off towards the fire. You can't be thinking about your system. The system has to just go at that point, right? So you need to have those systems. There's a book, you probably know it, called The E-Myth. Have you read that book, or do you know the book? The E-Myth. It's called The Entrepreneurial Myth. That's what E stands for, is the Entrepreneurial Myth, written by Michael Gerber. I truly believe it is one of those books that you would do very well to listen to a summary. In fact, just what I'm about to tell you might be enough to get what you need from that book. It's one of those business books that has a great, really important idea that then is repeated like 15 times throughout the book. You don't really need the whole book. Summary would be great. Here's the essence as far as I'm concerned, is the entrepreneurial myth is this. The entrepreneur is not somebody who starts their own business. That's what most people think. That's the myth. What Michael Gerber is saying, the reality is that very, very often what happens when a person starts their own business is not that they become an entrepreneur, they become an overworked technician. He uses the example of somebody like Joe, who is a great mechanic down at the local gas station. And everybody comes to this local gas station to get their car work done because Joe is such a good mechanic. Joe is not stupid. He is aware of this fact. So he says, gosh, I'm going to start my own garage. Call it Joe's Garage. People will come there, and they did. It was great. He loved it. Except that he was the mechanic, but he's also the guy doing, the billing, and also the guy doing the ordering. He's also the guy doing the cleaning up. He's also the guy doing the marketing. He's also doing taxes and all the accounting and stuff. It's like he was an overworked technician. He couldn't do his technician job being the mechanic as well because he was overworked all the time. That's not an entrepreneur. That's an overworked technician. So what entrepreneur is, according to Michael Gerber, is somebody who creates systems for a business. So in Joe's Garage example, you would have a system involved where there's a mechanic department, there's a billing department, there's an accounting department, there's a marketing department, there's a maintenance department. All of those departments have very specific systems that have to be done, job titles, job descriptions of things that have to be done in those things. You create a system so that therefore you could take Joe's Garage, run it very efficiently, and then open another virtually identical Joe's Garage on the other side of town. So you could have a Joe's Garage East and a Joe's Garage West, Joe's Garage South, Joe's Garage North. You could open a Joe's Garage in Seattle. It'd be the same. It's like Michael Gerber's over and over example in the book. It's like McDonald's, right? If you go to McDonald's in Cleveland and Seattle and Miami and Moscow, probably, any place in the world you go to McDonald's, it's McDonald's. There's no question about it. You can get the same, milkshake, same fries, same McMuffins or whatever, right? It's McDonald's. And it's the same, sesame seed bun with the 3 pickles on it exactly the same way. Ray Kroc designed this thing so it'd be replicated. That's what an entrepreneur is. He creates systems. You're welcome. You've just saved the money on buying that book. That's pretty much it. But the idea is that you create these systems in your business or life, right? So that willpower doesn't have to be the thing that makes it all happen, right? It's just that you get up and you go. Because by the way, after a while, that system that I created for running was a well-oiled machine. I was like one of those firemen. I wasn't like waking up halfway around the park thinking, oh, my shoes are on the wrong foot. It was pretty much that I was kind of like that fireman. I'd get up and I would go, right? Question was not if, question was how far. And I had that ease system that I've told you about before, the easy, acceptable, and stretch, and extraordinary level. Now, just to review that, in this particular case, as a runner working towards running a marathon, my extraordinary level was to go twice around the park, which I did not do every day. It was extraordinary to do it. I would do it every third day, maybe, every other day, possibly. But that was extraordinary when I did it. And I aimed towards doing that. I knew I should do that. And I was easy with myself. If I did the next level down, the stretch level, which was one loop around the park, approximately 4.5 miles from my house, that was a stretch. That was a good basic training day, right? If I couldn't have the time to do that for whatever reason, I would do what I consider to be acceptable, which is to run to the park. And it's basically in Prospect Park, it's the first transverse. So it's from my house, probably about 2.5 miles. So not the stretch, not the extraordinary, which would be about 7 to 8 miles, but something. If I couldn't do that, then I would at least put my gear on my running shoes, etc. Very simple in the summertime, very a lot of gear in the wintertime. Right now it's, I don't know, 15 degrees outside here in New York. So it's a lot of gear to go run. Nevertheless, even if I put all my gear on and went outside up to the corner, which is probably like 100 yards away, I could check it off on my list and said, yeah, I ran today. I ran 100 yards, but I still ran today. So I would get it in my brain that I'm a runner. What do runners do? They run. Maybe a little, maybe a lot, maybe extraordinary, but it's something every day. So you get basically the identity shifting. And that's what happens when the identity shifts to say, I'm a runner. Then it doesn't have to be willpower to say, I'm going to take myself for a run. It's like, no, I'm a runner. I run, right? I'm a writer. I write. You do who you are. So what replaces the willpower? Who you are replaces the willpower. And that's where life becomes easy, right? That's where it starts to really go with the flow of stuff. So what I'd like to request that you do is just think about this for yourself. Where are you using willpower, or where are your clients using willpower to compensate for, misalignment, where you're not in alignment with your goals and your identity, maybe. What would it feel like if it were better designed? What would it feel like if it were better designed? What would be easier if it were better designed? And what are you forcing that might need a different approach? Okay. So just think about that. I would just like to point out that willpower is not a weakness, right? It's wisdom. Needing less willpower is the result of wisdom. When you realize that it's a message that you're needing to use this willpower, it's like something is misaligned. So get that wisdom from that message from your unconscious. If you're feeling, stressed out or exhausted or burned out, you need to develop a better system. Ultimately, I help people do that with my coaching all the time. It's one of the big things I think I do with my coaching practice. Sustainable change doesn't require more effort. It requires better design. And I think that's a lesson we can all learn and take home with us. So thank you for being here today. Please like or subscribe to our channel. It helps you more than I can describe. I really appreciate that. And please come and see us at the essentialcoachingskills.com. And thanks very much for being here.